Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and this week on the Roundup, we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from our viewers over the last 7 days. It's Wednesday, August 7th, 2024, and today the 3 questions we'll be answering are: what is Gen Z really like, and should we adapt how we communicate with them? Second, how can you ensure positive agent partnerships? And finally, is the U.S. State Department finally changing the way it does visas? We'll answer these 3 questions and more over the next half hour. And as we do each week, we take the questions that we ask here on Wednesday afternoon, Eastern Time, from our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings. And that newsletter is called All the SMIE News Fit to Share, and SMIE stands for Social Media and International Education Consulting. That's the name of the company. Started over 10 years ago when I left Education USA. And this newsletter is free of charge. I've dropped the link to to our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe, where you can, if you prefer to get an email version of the newsletter, you can fill out your details by hitting the subscribe button, and that'll come to your inbox on Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern. The other opportunity to receive the email or receive the newsletter is via LinkedIn, which has certainly become the most popular way to receive the international ed news that we send out each week. And I'm dropping a link to this most recent edition where you can also subscribe if you prefer your international ed news via LinkedIn. Now, between the two email and LinkedIn versions, we now have over 2,000 folks subscribing to the newsletter across international education, and so heartwarming to see the response I get from colleagues each week who comment on the newsletter or particular stories in it. We hope it is becoming an important part of your international edification. That's the reason we designed the newsletter 5 years ago, is to really help folks like yourselves who are international educators who are so focused on the day-to-day for their jobs that rarely do they have time to look above the parapet because they're so busy to understand what's going on in the wider world, and have this newsletter and this roundup here on Wednesdays provide you 2 opportunities to get a little bit different perspective perhaps on the hot takes of the day on how those issues might impact us in international ed, and we talk more in depth about some of those key themes we see developing in the newsletter here on the Wednesday roundup in this live chat. So let's get right to our first question of the day. What is Gen Z really like, and should we adapt? Now, obviously, we've been in the midst of Gen Z in terms of the students applying to our institutions for some years now. But what we really see with Gen Z is, I'm a Gen Xer, and we're the forgotten generation, we're the latchkey generation, all of that. And every generation sort of has their stereotypes. And you wonder about this current generation, and we see folks, millennials who have graduated and are in the work world. Some of the younger Gen Zs might have different expectations when it comes to work world in terms of promotions and what companies should be providing as part of their employment at a particular organization or company. So what is Gen Z for the college age kids that are coming through right now? What are they like, and should we be changing the way we message to them and adapting how we do things? And this is coming out of a report by Duolingo, was published this month, that examines the shared values and experiences of Gen Z, debunking characterizations of them as tech-obsessed, attention deficit, and self-centered, and highlighting their emerging role in shaping global politics and economics. This is a Pi News article highlighting the Duolingo report, and it was co-authored by Anna Izaki-Smith, one of the leading lights in international education, so certainly well respected in the industry. What Anna has had to say is, what struck me, quote unquote, was the cohesion of student perspectives. I spoke with students from a variety of countries studying at universities across the globe, and yet so much of what they said was thematically united. So in the past, she points out that geography used to play a bigger role in differentiating baby boomers in the US versus the UK versus other countries. It's likewise for Gen X and millennials. And here she makes the point, as Gen Z is the first generation to be truly globally connected, with information now generally accessible no matter where people live. And this is her words, I sensed a greater cohesion in terms of how they viewed the world. So she interviewed students attending universities in the UK, US, and Australia, and highlights students' responsible approach to AI, their renewed appreciation for emails, interesting, and their concerted effort to detox from social media. So this is a very interesting perspective. And when we think about Gen Z, we think about someone who lives on their phone 24/7, who is continually plugged in, absorbing content left, right, and center. But this particular study that Anna's done and the interviews she's conducted suggests that there might be some other more relevant trends as it impacts what students do and where they get their information that we might want to pay a little bit more attention to. So that the responsible approach to AI was a theme that from her interviews. And the pool of interviews isn't necessarily the biggest pool that you could imagine. There were 7 international students attending universities in those 3 countries. And it's a small sample, she admits, that cannot serve an accurate representation of Gen Z. Their perspectives may indicate emerging trends, as well as an idea of how this generation views aspects of life and society. So the interesting about Gen Z that Anna said that they are not maybe as ADD as we thought they might be, that they are surprisingly, in her words, self-regulating, that they might be related to their approach to consuming media, that they are aware perhaps more of how dependent they've become on digital tools, and indicates perhaps that we might be putting labels on them that are not perhaps the most accurate. So we talk about the age, the size of these demographics in different countries. In the US, Gen Z, that's those born between 97 and 2012. Some see that, or it's a little bit late, so maybe 1995 to 2010 as Gen Z, that that age bracket in the U.S. represents 70 million young people, up from 57 million 14 years ago. And they could make up 17% of eligible voters this coming election season in the U.S. In China, the Gen Z population is estimated at 251 million people. And you'll think China's population is 1.3 billion now, so they're just under... let's do quick math. So certainly around 20%, just under 20% as well, 18% of the country's overall population. That's in India, in urban India, Gen Z population is 116 million. And keep in mind, in India, it's a much more spread out country. Yes, they have the major urban centers, but the population of 1.4 billion and growing is perhaps more evenly spread across that country. So there are some interesting takes on the Gen Z that they make up 45%. This is an interesting one. Gen Z makes up 45% of the world's 4.7 billion social media users, with the average user spending 2.5 hours per day on social media. So those numbers are pretty eye-opening in terms of what they say and they're spending on time, and that's their addiction. It's perhaps dispelling the myth that they're 24/7 on social media when the numbers say only 2.5 hours a day instead of 12 hours a day. So that perhaps that they are maybe losing interest in some of these social platforms. That how they have their goals and they're eager to achieve them. They view education as their vehicle to achieve them. Not surprising from students that are already made decisions to study outside their home countries. So that's perhaps a self-selecting group there. But in terms of, it's a very small sample size, very small piece of the larger pie of the generation. that they have proven, at least the ones that I interviewed, more sophisticated in terms of their use of AI, that not necessarily just using it as a cheat code, that they're actually using it as a base to get ideas on the page and then refine from there. So interesting to comment that this group is perhaps turning back to email, as perhaps earlier late millennials were and early Gen Zers were very focused on messaging apps. That this generation, revealed the enduring value of emails that provide, quote unquote, a greater degree of security, of structure and detail, particularly in academic and professional settings. So perhaps a great appreciation for what those students can bring to the table. So do we need to adapt how we are communicating with these individuals? And I think this is something we really want to pay attention to, because communicating who we are and what we do as institutions is ultra important to the messaging we put out, how we do it, where we do it, all of that. For those that follow the 6 Ps that we talk about here on the Roundup regularly and in our newsletter, that P of platforms and people and personalization, peers and personalization are the ones where you certainly need to be personalizing your message, reaching the students where they are on the platforms they're using at the time that they're using them. So one of those platforms that without a doubt is the elephant in the room, even globally, bigger than anything in China, and that is WhatsApp in terms of an instant messaging app. Currently, there are 3.03 WhatsApp users in 2024 as of this April. So that is just an enormous number that are using this platform for messaging. They're increasingly using it to consume their social media, whereas they might have been on Facebook or Insta before. They're now perhaps using WhatsApp to get brands that they're following on WhatsApp as opposed to those other platforms. And that it's a convenient tool that allows them to do in certain countries. It's also kind of like WeChat in China or Alipay in China. It's a multifunctional app that allows them to pay for things and shop and do all the wonderful things that they can do on different applications. That's not the case in the US. It's not really a pay platform yet, but may develop into that. But we see it's one of the most downloaded, it's first on the list of most downloaded apps globally with 44.93 million downloads. Fourth in the US with 63 million downloads. So in the US, we're over 100 million currently on WhatsApp, or about 100 million. So it is the monster platform for the majority of the world. Obviously not in China, but there's WeChat and other messaging apps that you can use there. So what is shocking, and this is not surprising because it's the world and not just the United States. We think all these great technologies, social media platforms that started here are the biggest here than anywhere else. But 100 million in the United States. In Brazil, there are the number 3 top countries on social media, let's put it this way, 390 million users of WhatsApp in India. Brazil next at 148 million. And then Indonesia, 112 million. So those 3 countries, 2 of them are smaller than the United States, have more users on the platform. So we're, as I mentioned, about 100 million users on WhatsApp in the US. The most dominant age group of WhatsApp users, though, is 36 to 45, accounting for 20% of the user base. Males are 53%, females 46% of the population in the US. So again, different countries, different strokes for different folks in terms of the numbers from those countries, and age brackets will vary dramatically. So of all the internet users in the world, 52% are using WhatsApp every month. 2.7 billion active users in a month. So the most significant app for everywhere outside of China to be on for messaging. So is this one that the Gen Z, future college age student populations, are they on it? And the likelihood is in most other countries around the world, they will be. the ones on that platform. So is that part of your overall messaging strategy? I'll drop the link to that article as well into the chat, so you can have that for your reference as well. We'll move on to our second question of the day, and that is, how can you ensure positive agent partnerships? Now, this is something that I think a few years ago, when probably over a decade ago now, when the agent debate in the United States really started taking off. I remember at the time I was working with Education USA. There were NACAC was going through this self-examination period where they were deciding whether they would allow, recommend even their member institutions use agents internationally. They had their best practices, their ethical code of conduct kind of notice that agencies should not be promoted. And there might be sanctions for institutions if they did. That never happened. And NACAC eventually endorsed use of agents. Education USA, which had previously prevented their advisors out in the field around the world working with agents that represented different universities at their events, also relented and agreed that yes, their advisors can work with agents that might be representing different institutions. So there has been a real sea change over the last 10, 15 years in the United States in terms of their attitudes towards agencies. But for the first 10 years or so, 12 years, you would think it was almost very much a one-way relationship. The agents sent students to universities, and those that sent the most were getting the most reward, and those that didn't were cut loose. And there's, to a certain extent, that still happens. But what the most successful relationships in agent and university or college relations, what do those look like? What do those partnerships really look like? In the end, they have to be two-way. There has to be communication both ways, both from the universities to the agencies, indicating what the expectations are, what they can do, what they can't do. And there has to be communication from the agents to the universities about the kinds of students that they're seeing, things in our individual university processes that might be a little bit outdated or need some attention so that they can improve processes, improve levels of interest. And I think what many of us on the higher ed side have neglected for a long time is really treating them as real partners. And that's something we've done considerably at UNLV in my current position as Director of Global Recruitment and Partnerships. We developed an agent network where not only signing about 36, 37 agencies in the first couple of years, we also decided early on that we needed to be providing resources to them on a regular basis that they requested, and instead of just doing it on a one-off basis, providing that every month. That gives them updated content, news and events, faculty, student, alumni spotlight editions that have resources that they can download and use, links to video content that they can share with prospective students, any online events that we're doing. We have prospective student kind of virtual meetups with our admissions teams. Then we are also doing something for admitted students as well, closer to the admit dates for each term. So there's ways that we're providing content regularly to them. Yesterday evening, we did our first agent training session for the next academic year. We'll do another one tomorrow morning, giving our agents, inviting them to both sessions, whichever is most convenient for them, asking them to participate in the session to learn if they have new staff that are needing to get up to speed on our admissions processes on the undergrad side, English language side, as well as the graduate programs, explaining the differences in our processes, then giving them opportunities to ask questions. We also, during those agency meetings, training sessions, we provide the link to our newsletter so that they can subscribe if they're not already. And we also launched our first agent survey to ask our agent partners, hey, how are we doing? Are there things that we can be improving? Processes that you've identified that maybe are not working as well with us as they might be with other institutions because they do it differently. Those are the kind of things that we're trying to delve into because we are newer at UNLV to the internationalization game. So we're building this as we go in a lot of respects based on experiences of previous institutions and recommendations we've had on where to go, who to work with, who not to work with, what makes sense admissions process-wise, kind of fitting and modifying our existing approaches, and really approaching the international students as very distinct and different from our domestic audiences that we typically recruit. So there's a learning process, certainly. But how can you ensure positive agent relationships and partnerships? There's a couple articles that I'm sharing here. First one's from University World News that entitled Student Recruitment, What a Good Partnership Looks Like, written by Mark Ashwell, who's had his own consulting company, Capstone, in Vietnam for over 2 decades now. And he talks through kind of what he looks for from institutional partners as kind of his main criteria for selecting partners to work with, university partners to work with. So that's something in the U.S. we always think that every agency in the world wants to work with us. Why wouldn't they? But the reality is not every agency wants to work with us because they might already have someone that they're promoting in our state or in our region that would be a direct competitor. So they're trying not to do that. Try not to overload and be representing too many institutions at once because that dilutes the quality and the quantity potentially that institutions can expect. So Mark identifies some factors that he looks for. Regional accreditation, kind of what we all agree in the U.S. is the gold standard of institutional accreditation. That's representing those only regionally accredited institutions. Looking at selling points for students and parents, that knowing what parents and students want, and then identifying institutions whose selling points match those and those that resonate with families. There's also the net cost. And in many countries, if you don't have a net cost under a certain dollar threshold per year, then you're not going to be competitive in that market. Even though your total budget might be $50,000 a year, if you don't have scholarships that bring that down to 35 or less, you're going to probably lose out on a lot of students in particular markets. So the scholarship dollars do matter, and those that don't have significant scholarships will likely not get the numbers, particularly at the undergrad level, in targeted countries. And that recruitment efforts do need to be proactive, that universities need to be engaged in country if at all possible to supplement what they do digitally or in working with particular agent partners in country, consultants in country, to get the word out and make the message clear about who they are and what they believe in. But there's a whole list of different things that Mark identifies that universities need to be upfront with in terms of realistic expectations, what the application process looks like, how simple it is, and that's his emphasis, that they need to be simplified. That focus on safety and well-being matters in most markets, that parents want to know if their sons and daughters are going to be taken care of when they're sent overseas at age 18, 19. And then what the international numbers look like at that institution and whether or not they're up and down or if they've been growing, and that's always a good sign of things are going well there. So communication is key, not having quotas for different countries, not double dipping, that type of thing. Those are the things that Mark identifies as some really positive things that are good hallmarks of positive partner relationships. And another aspect to this is how well you communicate with your agent partners throughout this process. We talk about our newsletter at UNLV, that we have monthly newsletter that has news and events, highlights new staff coming on board, what their roles are, things that are of concern to us that we want to make sure our agent partners know about. And one of the folks, at this time of year especially, everybody's freaking out about summer melt. And summer melt, if for those not aware, it's the kind of from the time students deposit or tell you that they're coming to the actual enrollment dates, the numbers tend to drop off a fair bit, depending on a variety of issues. But the one that's really raised its head in recent years has been the transfer out phenomenon, and the students that have gotten their visas to come to you and decide that that they want to come, they enter the country on your visa, and then they decide, no, I'm not going there. I'm not going to your school. I'm going to this community college instead of the 4-year institution. So because it's just cheaper, and that's really where I wanted to end up, and I have family in the area, and then you never hear from them again. You're legally obliged to transfer the record to the institution that they have documented they have been admitted to and wish to transfer to. So the transfer outs, how do you get around that? And this agency study group, one of those pathway providers that's modified their approach to being kind of a direct recruitment provider now. They have three strategies that they recommend to understand the transfer outs. Work with agents in good faith, establish an application process that accounts for potential red flags. I have a family in the area. They're way that they don't seem to know anything about your institution. Of course, you don't know that unless you have essays or other things that show they have actual interest in you. And a third strategy is follow students along their enrollment journey, and that continuing the conversation, making sure that they're engaging with you throughout the process. They're jumping through the hoops that you set up for them to ensure that they are legit and really wanting to be enrolled on your campus. So some good pieces there from Mark Ashwell and then study group. The final question of the day is one that, ironically enough, article appeared in the Pie News that I was actually quoted in extensively today, and it will feature that in the newsletter next week and perhaps again on the Roundup. But it's about, is the U.S. State Department finally changing the way it does visas? And I don't think they'll ever say they're changing the way they do visas. It's regulatory, and there are certain hurdles and questions that every student has to answer to the consular officer's satisfaction. And if you don't know what they are you a legitimate student? Can you pay for your education? And what's your plan for when you're done? And proving that you have ties to your home country. Those are the things that every student has to answer successfully to the satisfaction of the visa officer before they will get that stamp in their passport. So is that changing, that process changing? Not really. That's still, those three things are still regulatory. They still must be answered to the satisfaction of the consular officer. But what is changing is who actually needs to go for an interview. There has been, during the pandemic, it was adopted and made permanent that if a student has had a visa to the U.S. within the last 5 years, they would not need to do an in-person interview. They just still need to go through the application process, but don't need to physically sign up for an appointment weeks or months in advance to get their visa. That takes out a swath of, not a lot, but a swath of potential students that wouldn't need to go again for the same kind of security clearance that they've just gone through recently. Another potential change is that there's always been, certainly for the last decade or more, a prioritization of student visa appointments over, say, a regular visitor visa at embassies and consulates overseas. But now it's become more explicit, and other carve-outs like, this student has the student has an upcoming start date within a week or two, and it's important that we get them an appointment before then because they got a scholarship, and they'd lose that if they don't. Then that process can be sped up, and emergency appointments can be granted. So there's that happening. But probably one thing that reflects the change in the way they do things for visas was a comment made by one of the visa folks at in Consular Affairs that at the EdUSA forum last week, made the comments during a session or at a keynote. Don't know which one, but since I didn't get to go, but certainly she made the comment that they're really focusing and hammering into the heads of their consular officers who are fresh out of foreign service training on their first couple of assignments out in the field around the world, that their majority of their duties are as frontline visa officers. So they're told that, hey, don't expect an 18-year-old to know what they're going to do for the rest of their life at age 18, or what they're going to do in 5 years' time when they graduate, to have that all figured out. That's not realistic. And that's every university admissions person that's traveled abroad and met with students and has been a student themselves would say exactly the same thing. No one knows at age 18 what they're going to be doing when they graduate a year after they've done their OPT. So that is something that, if that message is getting through, and it's debatable as to whether that's happening or not, to address the kind of issues that we're seeing in Africa, to address the kind of visa wait times, those are potentially different issues. but certainly the visa denial rates are going to be next up in the mixer for serious attention and focus by consular affairs. They know it's an issue, particularly in Africa. They're looking at ways that they can address that better. So is the State Department changing the way it's doing visas? For the State Department, yes. They are actually making moves that are logical and make sense, and saving any massive immigration overhaul that changes statuses or changes F1 to dual intent instead of non-immigrant. The green cards for college graduates, international college graduates, all of those things are kind of dream scenarios. But unless something like that happens, State Department is doing what it can within the regulatory restrictions that it does have. So progress. So it's always a good thing in this respect. So that's all we have for you this week on the Midweek Roundup. Next week will be our last roundup before we hit the road this fall. I'll be leaving as of next Wednesday evening for a 2.5-week trip to South Asia. So looking forward to maybe doing a live or two from the road in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. So until next week, we wish you the very best, and we'll chat with you in 7 days' time. All the best. Cheers.